Welcome, welcome. We are so glad to have you here with us tonight for this second event in our Lean Into Allyship series. I'm Samantha Jefferson, and here with me are Dan Beltran and Dr. Alex G. I want to start out by thanking the generator once again for providing the technology to make this event possible, and a huge thank you to Dr. G again for generously giving your time to all of us tonight. We are so excited and honored to partner with Justified Anger to make this event and future events possible, so thank you so much for that. I also want to provide a quick disclaimer that while Dan and I both work for American Family Insurance, this is not an AmFam sponsored event, and the views we share in these sessions are most certainly our own. For those who did not attend last time and are not yet familiar with Dr. Alex G, I wanted to start with an introduction. So Dr. G is the president, founder, and visionary for the nonprofit Nehemiah. This organization's vision is to engage the greater Madison community to empower African-American individuals, families, and communities to bring about hope, transformation, and justice. Dr. G has 35 years of experience in this space of serving as an advisor to leaders across the world. His efforts have also included educating, coaching, and mobilizing white allies. He passionately and selflessly invests in allies, like those of us here tonight, through Justified Anger, which we'll talk about more a little later in the conversation. So again, we've asked Dr. G to be candid and speak from the heart tonight, which he no doubt will. We're just, again, incredibly grateful for his time and energy that he's here spending with us. As Dr. G instilled in us in our initial event, we now know that allies educate, affiliate, and donate. So I think we should just kind of ground ourselves back in those three tenets, and let's talk about those quickly. So educating. First, we want to applaud you for coming back after our June 2nd event or for attending for the first time. It's easy to go back to our regular life or not take action and turn away from the recent events and emotions around systemic racism. The fatigue is real, and our privilege allows that. We need to lean in and educate ourselves to ensure that we are appropriately and authentically diagnosing the real issues, not the symptoms. Dr. G said that if you don't understand the issues, you won't be tethered to the solutions, and you'll only be moved by the next crisis. That's something that has been such a huge takeaway for me personally, and that I have really used to kind of guide my my efforts and my growth as an ally. The next tenet would be donate. So if able, we really want to encourage you once again to make a donation to Nehemiah for Dr. G's time to educate us. So we'll provide the link again in the PDF that we can send out after the event. We cannot expect Dr. G to educate us for free, and it's our responsibility to provide financial support for his efforts and his time. So if you haven't done so, please do consider that $5, $10 plus donation. His Black Like Me podcast also has kind of a monthly support opportunity that's a very incredible option as well. So get involved and kind of just figure out what we can do to support Dr. G and his continued partnership with us. And then lastly, affiliate. So we'll talk about that at the end of the event and more opportunities to affiliate and keep this growth going for all of us. So moving forward, Dr. G has said, we must look behind us in order to move forward. In other words, we can't change what we don't face, and history is our present. We carry it with us, and we are our history. That will be our theme for tonight's conversation on why history matters. So by being here tonight, you are taking action to move the Black Lives Matter movement forward. We've received some truly inspiring insights and feedback from many of you on the actions you've taken to grow in your allyship since our first event. And Dan and I have been learning, unlearning, and growing right alongside each of you. And the one thing that we really want to stress is that allyship is a practice. Dan and I have both absolutely had a fair share of cringeworthy moments along our journey, and we want to encourage each of you to really just get comfortable with being uncomfortable. There's no way to really, grow and strip ourselves back and be a tool and a servant to this movement, and as allies, if we aren't willing to do that. And again, that is part of our privilege that would even allow us that choice, and so to really work beyond that fragility and that privilege and go deeper. And that's really what tonight and this series is all about, and will always continue continue to focus on. So as many positive and forward progress, successes, and victories that have taken place over the past month since we were last together, there have absolutely been heart-wrenching and deplorable instances as well. It is important to, recognize and embrace both along the way. And Dr. G, I just thought that we might ground ourselves in the authenticity of this conversation by asking you to share your experience with the recent Zoom bombing of your allyship event last week. Could you share what happened and what you want people to know about that situation?
Sure. Samantha and Dan and others, Lauren and folks from Generator, I'm really excited about tonight and appreciate this platform and opportunity to talk further with folks who are leaning into allyship. So last week I was hosting an orientation or training for some of our non-Black allies. There are about 70 plus people in the room, and about an hour into the meeting, it was Zoom bombed. Someone took over it, muted folks, and then just started writing the N-word, and it called me that name about 85 times, and then wrote KKK space KKK. Like they took time to do this. Like this is their job. They wrote that about 250 times, and then they said all N-words must die. About 20 of the folks in the training just left, just bolted, and just left. My staff was horrified. I had white staff members who were helping to coordinate the event, and they were saying, should we just stop? Should we just stop? I was muted, and I just kept shaking my head, saying, nope. This is what we're dealing with. This is not the 1950s and the 1960s. This is the attitude that we as people of color have been saying, particularly African Americans. This is the attitude you cannot regulate. This is what has not gone away. And this is what many of us say we feel in certain places. And so it was a horrific, experience. I think the backlash was in the following days. In the moment, I know how to stand up in a moment of aggression. But I have to be honest, like the next day, I just had to take off the afternoon and just leave and go for a ride, because it's not just that, but was this targeted? Do people know where I live? Is my wife safe? Is my daughter? All of these questions that are just built into it. And we'll probably get into this more later, Samantha, but that was the verbal assault. The silent assault in communities like Madison are far more damaging than being called the N-word 85 times in front of your white friends and colleagues. And so I'm hoping that that's some of what we get into today. But I mean, it went all the way up to the FBI. The FBI are actually looking into this situation because there was a threat made.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know Dan and I were deeply impacted by that story when we got to connect with you last week, and that was it was powerful, especially what you've just told us as far as your reaction, that it isn't even those moments, it is others, which again we will talk about later in the session. But I think just wanting to just ground us in the reality that these back and forth, forward progress, a step forward, steps back, these things are all around us all the time. And that is part of our responsibility as allies to get involved, be aware, learn how to support and, prevent and move forward and just be a part of the conversation.
Sure. May I throw something else out, Samantha? It's
Definitely.
Interesting how witnessing an African-American person being called the N-word was very traumatic for folks. I mean, as I brought the group back and said, let's process this. What did you hear? Because again, my staff was trying to protect me. I'm like, come on, we've been called this for 400 years. I'm not about to shrivel up and die. But it's very interesting. People cried because they said, we can't believe that you have to live with being called this word. But we've been talking about racial disparities in Dane County for years. We've been talking about achievement gaps, economic wealth gaps. A recent study just came out showing that the disparity between Black home ownership and white home ownership in Wisconsin is the greatest disparity in the whole country. It's ground zero. And it's like, that doesn't make people cry. But the fact that I was called the N-word just horrified people. But when you're treated like the N-word, that's what horrifies us. Like we know how to respond in the moment. And so I want people who are allies to begin to shift how we think about these issues. It's not name calling that's creating these issues. It's the systems created by the attitude behind the name calling that makes it difficult, if not impossible, for people to succeed in spite of those barriers. And so I want to help people shift their thinking and understanding what we're really up against.
And thank you for sharing that, Dr. G. And one thing I want to share really quick and then we're going to get into the justified journey. I want to dig in deep there. Is that, Samantha, you shared this is a lifelong journey. I want to reiterate the first time I met you, Dr. G, we were sitting in your office, and I remember I said this to you, and I said, can you just correct me every time I say something wrong? Remember that?
Yes.
And I want to share that with this audience because we all make mistakes. And I said it out of true sincerity, but what I didn't realize I was doing is putting that burden on you to educate me every time I ignorantly said something.
Right.
And I'll never forget your response. And you actually did this. You leaned in and said, "What? Let's have a relationship, and you don't have to ask. That will just happen." And so I share that with the group to say, this is the first time I met Dr. G one-on-one. And that was like the second thing I said to him, after my name. But the key here is that I learned. And I showed up the next time. I was very embarrassed, but I showed up, and I know not to do that again. And that's going to be the message throughout this as well. And we're going to come back to that at the end, but just wanted to share a very honest mistake that I made. But that said, let's jump into Justified Journey. So it was premiered on June 29th. And so for those who weren't able to watch the premiere and the documentary that you were featured in, could you just give a brief overview of it, just what the goal was and what we as allies should at a high level take away from it? Why do we even care what was shared?
Sure. In preparing for our Justified Anger U.S. Black History course, History for a New Day, my responsibility is to do a 10-minute monologue before every lecture to connect the material that we're about to hear to our real lives today. Otherwise, we have a way of thinking that history was all ancient and it has no relevance today. So I decided to go search my great-great-grandfather's name. I knew it was Henderson G, just to find out how many generations am I away from slavery. Heard stories, but just hadn't really looked it up. Googled him in Ancestry.com, and I found a comment from a white gentleman who was near 70 and basically said, I just found out that my white great-great-grandfather, Reuben G, had a black son named Henderson. Does anyone know anything about Henderson G? That was posted 3 years prior to my reading that. So I didn't know if the email was current, if he was still alive. Wrote that night. He wrote me back that next morning. We went back and forth. I decided to go down there with a contingency of family members. And I met the first group of white G's. These folks were descendants of my family's slave owner, Reuben G. Reuben was John's great-great-grandfather, and Reuben is my great-great-great-grandfather. Reuben owned Venus, a slave, and raped her. That was part of slavery. It's not just making people work for free. It's owning their minds, it's owning their bodies. And so John is a descendant of Reuben's wife, Aurelia G, and I'm a descendant of Reuben's raped slave, Venus. And their children, Reuben's children, black and white, grew up around each other. My grandfather used to tell the story of having a blue-eyed blonde uncle named Thomas G. I thought he meant a light-skinned black person. So I went down to Mississippi years later and saw that the G store was founded by Thomas W. G. And then they just started all coming together. So the movie, the documentary, is really about the journey and meeting these folks to talk about how they perceived us, how we perceived them. But I realized that my story is not unique, Dan, that it is a microcosm of American history lived out in the G family. It tells a story of the creation of wealth. They're still wealthy. They're landowners, business owners. My father, Alexander G. Sr., was a sharecropper, which meant he picked cotton for a living until he moved to Chicago as a teenager, where he met my mother. So it's a movie about a documentary about a journey back to the South, to Mississippi, to just hear through the stories of blacks and whites, how our families worked together, what life was like, taking a look at some of the land, taking a look at the plantation, the actual homes, the house, and using it to tell the story of how disparity was created in this country through the lens of one family, the black G's and the white G's.
And you just mentioned wealth there, Dr. G, and that's what I want to dive into just a little bit further. So when we were talking to prepare for this, you mentioned just what you did there, and that your mom and dad were actually sharecroppers until they moved to Chicago. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So when I heard that, I want that to sink in for the audience. So I've heard statements such as, well, slavery is in the past, Jim Crow's in the past. Why do we have to keep living in the past? Just let it be. Let's move forward. And I'm not racist. And the comments keep going. And I want to explore when you mentioned that it was that close. So that means you're the first generation who's not a sharecropper or a slave. And so you mentioned last time that the Black community is 150 years behind the white family members. Can you unpack that a little bit and how the systems of oppression have done that and how that's impacted the wealth today?
Sure. That's a great question, Dan. I'm just writing notes so I don't get off track. Let me first say, if you're fortunate enough during your Google exercises, and this is just to the audience, there are a few accounts by slaves who lived long enough to be recorded and their experiences. There's such a look of horror and deep sorrow in their eyes that I can't look at them very long. Like I found one of those again. It's like, here's an account of a former slave. It's like in his own words, but it's like his eyes are these wells of darkness, and it's almost telling you to jump. It's almost haunting. It's almost looking in the eyes of someone who has been tormented by a haunted spirit, because life was just that difficult. But for sharecroppers, it was the same thing, except you weren't owned. You still, I mean, the KKK proliferated itself after the end of slavery, because during slavery, Black people were chattel property, so they were of value. After the Emancipation Act, Black people were not slaves, which meant they were a threat because they could farm, they could grow their own cotton, they could grow their own corn, they could compete against you, they could start their own printing presses, they could write articles about the lawlessness of lynching, but they were expendable because they were no longer property. If we think that chattel property is horrible, being expendable, former chattel property is even more treacherous, because you would not sit back and let the KKK set your slaves on fire. You would not sit back and let people set your house or your cars or belongings on fire. So I just say that even into sharecropping carries some of the same horror. There was more fear of the KKK. There's more fear of lynching. And so it also carried with it a sense of mental health issues. Looking back, looking at my father's absence in my life, I realized so much of it was just dealt with the trauma he witnessed in society that crept into home, that became a part of his everyday life. And actually, as we got closer to the end of his life, as we started reconciling, I realized 70 years ago, there's no place for a Black man to sit down and say what I'm saying today. You couldn't get hundreds of white people to sit down and listen sympathetically to a story. And so part of this work is paying homage to those Black women and those Black men who are still terrorized by sharecropping, which is like my family, my wife's family, we're just one generation away. And so those folks with those fears have raised us. And so we carry some of that epigenetically, socially, spiritually, and it's difficult and it's painful. The reality as it plays out is that you worked on someone else's land, and then you ended up owing them money at the end of the year. And so you felt like you were getting away, felt like you were being freed, but you're still making people free, and you are no closer to freedom yourself. So you work just as hard, but as a slave, you didn't expect a profit. As a sharecropper, you did. You worked. This is my land. This is my field. These are my crops. But what it meant was that it just perpetuated the economic and the wealth gap, because Blacks still worked on these farms that were owned by white folks. And so I don't know if my family worked on the G plantation as a sharecropper, but what I do know is that even when slavery ended, my great-great-grandfather Henderson was born in 1847. So by the time the Emancipation Proclamation came around, he was 20. So he'd already been shaped and formed by slavery. He was an adult. Life expectancy was a lot shorter. But there weren't a lot of people who were going to sell former slaves businesses and property and those kinds of things. And so what it meant was the whites still had the residual impact of the wealth that they had created. and the blacks carried the burden of the residual um, exploitation. So you're starting with nothing after making America become a super world power economically. And so in our family, there's like a 150-year gap. So by the time Henderson was freed, the G's were already wealthy. They had already gotten the Homestead Act. They already had lots of land. They were riding shiny buggies. They owned lots of property and the businesses. And the narrative that is created was they were smart. They were overseers. They knew how to do business. They knew how to do business, but these black folks were just good for being field hands. And so it was already stuck in people's minds because of race-based slavery that black people were inferior and they're not worthy of running businesses and having their own resources. And so it perpetuated the economic gap. And although Henderson and his children and children's children eventually were born in homes and had property, we had streets named after the black G's, we were able to still do great. But the fact is, I'm still 150 years behind my cousin John in terms of equity. I think the example I use with you and Samantha is even if we lived on the same street, for those of us who are from Madison, even if we lived on University Avenue for 150 years, if I own and you rent, our economic picture is vastly different 150 years later. And that's what we have. When you have equity, that's how you generate wealth in this country. It's how you buy votes. It's how you influence and invest in politicians. It's how you create schools. It's how you build systems. It's how you send your kids to medical school and law school and dental school. And so 150-year head start on a system that was already 250 years old. And sure, slavery is over, but the attitude that created it, that white supremacist attitude, that was still prevalent. Slavery did not create white supremacy. White supremacy created slavery. The absence of slavery does not equate to the absence of white supremacy. So that attitude perpetuated itself in separate but equal, Jim Crow, Reconstruction, Deconstruction, separate but equal, even to civil rights acts where to move ahead, black women were incentivized to not marry so that they could receive money from the government to take care of their children. And it was the first time since landing on American shores that the black man did not know his place in his family. Even in slavery, he was whipped and beaten and treated like a horse, but he came home to that family. But during welfare, that's not what happened. And so it just perpetuates this ugly system. And so now, Dan, we're in this place where with the death of George Floyd and what happened with Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and others, America's saying, oh my God, we've been hearing this, we see it, we believe it, Black Lives Matter. And it's true, I'm glad people are waking up, but it's 150 years, am I doing my math right? 170 years later since the Emancipation Proclamation, 170 years later, and we're just now waking up to it. And then, we've been saying that the fathers not being in the home was the problem. We've been saying overwhelming, overprotective Black mamas, that's the problem. Urban kids not having the intellect to handle the rigor of integrated schools, that's the issue. We're now realizing, wait, it might be systemic. Now we have to go to the same white-led, white-owned foundations who are dealing with dollars that may have been inherited, bequeathed from money that's made through exploitation. And we have to now beg those same systems to understand our causes and to believe that what we say are the issues, while they want to maybe support things that feel philanthropic and supportive, but do not undo what's gotten us here. And that's the real work that we have right now. Sorry, that was a long answer. I promise you I won't do that on all of them, but it's very deep and sordid and it's ugly. And unless we are shrewd for understanding it so that we can address it, unless we have the stomach to untangle it to the extent that they have the stomach to enmesh it, we're never going to get away from this point. Never.
Absolutely. Yeah, that kind of leads into our next question. So Dr. G talking about just going back and revisiting your quote, if you don't understand the issues, you won't be tethered to the solutions. You'll only be moved by the next crisis. And that really is why we're here today. That's why we're taking a step back and looking into our history. And I wanted to talk about, at a point in your documentary, we get to meet another one of your cousins, Marianne.
Sure.
She is a white female who currently owns G's grocery store, right? And she ends up connecting even more of the dots of your family story and introduces you to another cousin who brings you to the G plantation. And that is such a powerful experience in and of itself. Just knowing what went on there, and the relationships that, that were had. And that was such a powerful moment that really stuck with me. And you seem to speak really fondly of them both, right? And you stated in the documentary that you really felt their warmth. You talked about how they never questioned that you were, fully a G, or how you became a G. They knew how it happened. And you talked about how they have such a better handle on U.S. history and Mississippi history and pre and post emancipation relationships between Blacks and whites. And just that they had such a better handle on history than your liberal minded friends in the North. And that was a moment that was powerful, right? For us up here in Madison, Wisconsin, watching that documentary, because it is 100% true, because it's so true. And I know Dan's question gets into systemic racism
Sure.
and its pervasiveness today, just in a bit, but I did want to ask about, could you talk to us a little more about some of the key differences that you noted as far as awareness and education around our nation's history?
Sure. What's so interesting, Samantha? The more I see the documentary, because again, I lived that 2 years ago. That was my second time meeting Marianne. I process it more and more deeply. So they are aware that we are G's, that we hung together. I don't know to the extent Marianne was really aware that I'm a result of slavery.
Okay.
So for example, we got stuck a little bit with Cousin John.
Okay.
Because he took issue with the fact that I said Venus was raped. And my point is, it was 1847. White women were being raped. It wasn't just a Black woman thing, but she was a slave. She was chattel property. This is not a Nicholas Sparks film. This is not forbidden interracial antebellum love. This is a woman you owned. Do you not think Venus was attracted to another Black man on that plantation? Do we not think that other men were attracted to Venus? How do you say no when the person who raped you is the father of your only child? And what's your fear about him? And what was said about him? Like, how do you coerce someone to do this? Some of the early records, I saw someone who could have been Venus in Virginia, where the G's, a Welsh family, a wealthy Welsh family. The G's came here from Wales with wealth. And just tracing, my white cousins have helped me and others have helped me to trace the G history. There were G's that connected with or married servants of like royalty in England. And so they came from some really cool places, but still received more money from the U.S., the Homestead Act. And so in some records, it looked as if Venus moved from Virginia inland to Mississippi. And so, like, what was the hold on her? How do you move her around? And how was she viewed? And how do you maintain dignity? And with that level of control, white slave owners were threatened by Black men because they were rich and they had land and they had whips, but yet this woman was attracted to what they would call a Black buck. So that caused a power struggle between white slave owners and the Black man who Venus was in love with, or who was in love with Venus. What else was created was Reuben had a wife named Aurelia. They had about 7 children together. Mm-hmm. Henderson lives next door to them. I've found census records. He lived next door. Like they have the addresses, and it's on rural Route 1, and it's like lot 812 and lot 813. So you're married to this man, but there's a little kid that looks just like your husband and your kids. And sometimes people think that because different cultures mix, the uniquenesses are indistinguishable. That's not true. But I see a picture of Reuben's two sons, his two oldest sons, Robert Lafayette G., John's great-great-grandfather, and Henderson, John's great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather. Their hairline's the same. Their features, their eyes, and their nose, like it's when Black people look at them, they're like, oh yeah, look at the hairline. Look at oh yeah, oh yeah, they're related. Even though Henderson's eyes are green and his hair was straight and wavy. And so the trauma, so that in addition to just slave pressure, Samantha, you've got Reuben who has the life of these Black men in his hand. And he's thinking that Venus should be committed to him because he's white, he's American, he's rich, and he's powerful. And she'd rather be in bed with a field hand than in his lush bed. And then Aurelia is understanding this. That brought Black people who are already brought here to this land into the family dynamics of very jacked up, very power hungry, very lust centered, white, rich families. And it was that stuff that destroyed. It was that would make you sell someone's child. Oh, okay. All right. So you don't want me to touch you? Oh, so you rather be with him? Oh, that's when your child being sold into slavery, sold someplace else is threatened. That's where the man you love gets threatened. And so to dismantle our families because of his lust, and then to fast forward 170 years later and have politicians talk about what's wrong with the Black family is the Black man is bullshit. To have done that, to not talk about that in history, to sire children and leave them? You're going to call me an absentee father? You're going to call Black men absentee fathers after you raped our mothers and our sisters many times right in front of us to teach us as a Black buck a lesson? And the fact that we're still intact, the fact that we are sane, the fact that we did not go all Nat Taylor, I think it was last name. Somebody tell me the insurrectionist. Crap, I can't remember Nat's. Somebody will come up, but he just like they made a movie about him, about shooting up and killing a plant. The fact that we still 400 years later, we still want to talk. We want to process. We want to be in a study circle. We want to sit with the mayor, the county executive, the governor. The fact that we still want to talk, and people are nervous because my movement is called Justified Anger, is ridiculous. Because the violence that was perpetrated on Nat Turner, thank you, Maggie. Maggie's my new best friend, Maggie Bickerman. That just breaks my heart when I hear it. That we were subject not just to the cruelty of the fields and the corn and the cotton, but insecure men. And what they did with that sense of powerlessness, it's horrible. It's horrible. That's never been apologized for. So in our families, I'm sorry, I'm kind of messing stuff up because that's not how my cousins think about it. They think that we're all family. Let's move ahead. And I think that's the part about it that I like. John and Mary didn't get up and think, Mary Ann didn't get up and think, I'm wealthy. It's because of these folks. They believe the American dream. We're white and we work hard. She goes to that store every day. Her dad went to that store every day. Her grandfather went to that store. Mm-hmm. They own land. They bought it. They went to the bank. They saved their money. They're believing the rhetoric because it's what they've been fed. Mm-hmm. They're not really processing why there's a white G cemetery and a Black G cemetery. And they're not thinking that Marianne and John, that we're G's and we're also Wilders, which could very well mean that we're double cousins, that there was breeding going on between plantations or something was going on, that we're all G's and our great grandfathers married women named Wilder. So there's a Wilder family that's Black, Wilder and white Wilder. There's a horror there that I think they're afraid of. The fact that they jumped in, Samantha, and just owned the fact that we're family meant a lot to me. The fact that she called James and said, we got some cousins down here who are trying to find Reuben's plot. Can you show them around? That she didn't say that there's some people, some visitors, some Black folks, some people staying there, our cousins. I was standing right there. She said, hey, this is Marianne. We got some cousins down here. And it wasn't like, when I got there, it wasn't like, oh, now I was in the car with 3 white men, Samantha. So I was there with my podcast manager, Greg, and his camera person. And so we pulled up and they're like, well, we're here. And I was like, y'all don't think I'm about to get out of the car, the only brother up in here, and go knock on that man's door. I know we're related, but in case you guys have not noticed, I'm the only brother in the car. So I'm pulling rank. One of y'all are going to go knock on that door. I knew where I was, Samantha. I was still in Mississippi. I was still down south. And I could hear dogs barking in there, and they sound like big dogs. They sound like very big dogs, Samantha. But he came out, and there was a genuineness. I mean, I have to tell you this. I genuinely like Marianne and James. I mean, I would like to spend time with them because they're like, well, we're not responsible for what happened, but we're not going to do that. Like I felt, now I could be way out. People might be thinking, Black man, you have lost your mind. I felt that being down there, if something broke out, they would step up and say, he's kin, and you're gonna stand down. Mm-hmm. Because I believe that they understood that going forward, I believe that they know we're related, that somehow that biology happened, those relationships happened. I don't think that they've been educated in a way that they're not freaked out that we're related, but I don't think that they understand the financial, the economic, the educational implications of what it means to be who I am now all these years later. And I mean, quite honestly, Samantha, I don't know if I want that responsibility. I mean, that might be the next step, but I don't want to sit down and say, so what do you guys think about reparations? What do you think about 40? I don't think I want to have, I think I'd rather have that discussion with y'all. But I have to process that, because after walking through that plantation, it took me about 3 months to be able to really process it. At the end of the documentary, I think I'm wearing a white shirt and I'm just processing things. Greg uses that to narrate the film. That's me processing, having been to Mississippi. I just talked nonstop for like 2.5 hours. They were able to break it up and use it, but that was like, we got back and then it took like 3 months for them to do some editing. And then I was just sort of letting things out and processing it. It's one thing to talk about your history. It's another thing to walk in that space, to feel the energy of that space. And it was really overwhelming. So I love the fact that they were embracing, but I think they, like most white Americans, find it very difficult to fathom. We as a nation have been crooked since before our inception. Yeah. And I think that's really hard for people. That's like telling them in the same day, no Santa, no Tooth Fairy, no Easter Bunny, no Cupid, and the earth is flat. I think it's tough. I'm sorry, Samantha. I'm sorry. I went way off on that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But that does kind of lead into, so the difference between the difficulty to process or just the refusal to process, right? So you talked earlier about, and in our conversation, with Dan and I previously, you talked about the silent N-word, right? And how does a progressive city that is celebrated as so forward-thinking and open-minded, like Madison, right, also suffers so desperately from the racial disparities and segregation and injustice that are, absolutely undeniable here in Madison?
Sure. That's a great question. I'll try to hit that with bullet points. I try to be succinct on this. We have time for more questions. I think the fact that we've ignored history is embarrassing. I think the fact that we have thrown tens of millions of dollars at race-related issues and they're no better is embarrassing, even for the business community. We put up money for this. I think the fact that the community has not listened to people of color and brought us to the table for solutions is also embarrassing. And so all the things that you're not supposed to do, we did. And I think we're so in love with our perception. That's not what I meant. We're so in love with our reputation that we feel that we don't have to do anything. And so things have gotten worse here, not because we're mean, but because we're better. And we think we're better than that. During the 60s, there was a threat of the Cold War. 50s and 60s, there was a threat of the Cold War. And so the world, hold on, I'm trying not to sneeze. Excuse me. The world, thank you. America was going to become a laughing stock in the world because you're trying to talk about you're not communist and you're mistreating your own Black people. And so America was really forced to pretend like it's dealing with the race issue so that it could have moral authority on the world stage to talk about the spread of communism and the threat of Cold War. But it wasn't sincere. Unlike America, Madison feels like we have nothing to fix. We are good. We love everybody. We don't see color. We don't talk about color. We didn't even notice that you're color, that you have color, Alex. And so at least during the 60s, because of the threat of Cold War and wanting to make it seem like all hearts are clear in the United States. And so there was pressure under Kennedy and LBJ to get that stuff together. Madison feels no pressure because Madison feels like we have no issues. And so they can't handle our rigor. And so for me, the silence of the N-word is that even now, Samantha, in the midst of all that's happening, I'm an expert on how it feels to be called the N-word, but organizations have not called upon us ad nauseum to say, how did we get here? What will it cost to get away from here? Mm-hmm. How much money should we put aside for anti-racism training? How should we be putting money aside to invest in Black-led efforts? Lead us in not just telling us how you feel pain, but lead us in how we fix this. I was giving a newspaper interview, a paper interview, and the reporter asked me recently, have things gotten better in Madison? And I said, has your paper become any more Black since Justified Anger broke? And they just got quiet. And I said, that's the answer to your question. Stop asking me, are we better? Stop putting me in a position where I have to take care of white people and say, well, yes, Missy, we's getting better. You just, don't you worry none. We're going to take care of this problem. We're going to make it safe for you. You're going to get your farmer's market back. You're going to get your Badger games back. We're going to be just fine. I was talking with someone and they asked me like for a sign of hope. And it's like a few days after, George Floyd died. And I said, that's not my job. Why should you go to sleep and feel comfortable at night? I don't. Why is it my job to come over here and do a soft shoe for you to make you feel better? It's not getting better because you're not willing to understand what the true issues are. And so the silence perpetuates this. And so for me in Madison, I'm really tired of people blaming all the name calling on Trump and Trump supporters because the N-word far outdates Trump. Now he's made it sexy to say it, but he didn't create the word. In one of my podcast episodes, Samantha, I talk about this and I said, Trump, in my opinion, is not intelligent. And I'm not trying to get political. I'm just saying, I said, Trump's not intelligent enough to create this system. He is a ventriloquist doll that is sitting on America's lap, voicing what America's been wanting to say for 400 years. He just has the balls to say it. But let's keep the record straight. It's folks in his party that are reaching out to people who look like me saying, how's it working for you? Trump said it. Give us a try. What do you have to lose? But folks in his party are reaching out to Black folks. And they're talking and they're visiting our stuff and they're saying, meanwhile, we've got folks who know that this stuff is going on. But are they reaching out? Are they calling? Are they convening? If they are, I'm a part of the African American Ministers Alliance. I'm a part of Blacks for Political and Social Action. I'm part of the oldest Black Greek letter fraternity. I'm the most senior and tenured minister in this community. I can go on and on and on. I got 12 degrees from UW-Mass. In so many places, if those conversations are happening, I should either be in it or privy to it. I am neither. And so the fact that all of this is going on and the attitude and the atmosphere that allows someone to call me the N-word 85 times on my own platform was not created by the radical right. It's created by Black white people who vote both ways and are either silent or vocal, but either way, no one's stopping it because you don't stop this with reading a statement about anti-racism. You stop this by empowering people, putting money up empowering organizations that know how to do this kind of work, building leadership, and then training allies, non-Black allies, to be able to work together and build these things together. And so let's call it out by everyone. This is not a political party issue. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we get lost. We get lost by blaming the other folks rather than saying we all have work to do. And I'm just saying we all have work to do.
Mm-hmm. And so just as a quick jump in, I don't think we started the session by saying, for those in the audience, if you have questions, put it in the Q&A chat. We're going to try to wrap this up about 8:05 with a couple more questions for Dr. G, but we want to hear from you of questions that you had as you watched the premiere, or if after hearing Dr. G, you have questions along the way, we're going to open up and ask him some of your questions as well. So that said, I wanted to just ask a really quick question, go back to what you mentioned, Dr. G, about the wealth. And you said that white supremacy created slavery, right? And so with slavery gone, we still have white supremacy. And you mentioned the word systemic. And for those in the audience who haven't heard or fully understand what systemic racism is, when we say we need to dismantle the systems, can you elaborate on that a little bit further? And I know it's a tall order to quickly explain what systemic racism is, but can you just explain what that is to the audience and really how that manifests in addition to the wealth and the health that we talked about in our last session as well?
Sure. And I know just the term systemic can sound like one of those academic buzzwords that make people shut down and just, they're making it up. But I'll use it just to be succinct with this example. And I was on a lecture. Today we trained about 200 teachers. We have this partnership with Department of Public Instruction and Madison Teachers Inc., which I'm really proud of. So it's the second year we've done this training, but a presenter did his PhD here. He's an African-American scholar. He works at UT Austin, but he gave this example, and I can't remember the bridge builder. I wish I could. But basically he said he made a point of building this bridge 7 feet 8 inches. It's kind of a low bridge, but 7 feet 8 inches, blah, 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 blah. Fast forward. He didn't want public buses coming into his neighborhood. So they built the bridge low enough so that buses couldn't get there. That's an example of a structure that's built that doesn't say racism, doesn't say KKK, doesn't say any of this stuff, but it's built into the fabric of this bridge. Now, unfortunately, a tour bus carrying white students coming into the city didn't know that the bridge was that short. Hit the top of the bridge, damaged it, hurt the white people on board. So what we got to understand is that systems are things that are put in place that don't have to say racist. It's just there to keep certain things out. Like, 7 feet 8 inches. Like, who knows how tall a public school bus is? But that's an idea. That's an idea of a systemic or structural racism, actually, where something was built for perpetuity. It's not like bridges go away in 2 or 3 years. It's not like, hey, fix that. I mean, remember, it's like a truck hit Seminole Highway Bridge years ago on the Beltran. So the structural racism were things like, it was on the books. If you were blacks, you couldn't own slaves. If your grandfather didn't vote, you can't vote, hence the grandfather clause. The poll tax. There are things that you built in that didn't just necessarily say, hey, you're a slave, this is going to happen. But you build rules to substantiate what you want to have. And so what happened was there was a need to really maintain order after the end of slavery. And so when you decide who can, who cannot own land, and voting is based upon who owns land and ethnicity, when you begin to put those clauses in, you don't have to say slavery. It's just, you're not white. I mean, you're not male. You can't vote. You don't own land. The rule says you don't vote. This is just the rule. I didn't make it up. It's just the rule. And so those rules are put in place so that it would benefit one group of folks, but it would also disadvantage another group of folks. Separate but equal schools and all of those things were just residual effects that we're better, we're stronger, we're going to tell you what to do, and you will never surpass us. So we're going to build rules that you can never outvote us. We're going to build all of these things into place so that you can never really get ahead. And so those attitudes that shaped our Constitution, our laws, our policies, our practices, those are part of the systemic reality. those are things that were put together so that it's harder for people of color to move ahead because there are all these invisible barriers. And others will say, no, that's just the rule, but not understand why that rule is put in place. And so with the structural racism, it maintains a social order that does not have to even refer back to slavery. It's just the way things have always been. And so people just abide by them. They believe, oh, well, we're free because we're smarter. You are bound because you need a direction. And it passes that attitude on to generation after generation after generation. And you don't even know that you've done it. You just sort of inherit it.
So in relevancy to what we're experiencing right now with COVID-19, in this very moment, we know that Black Americans are experiencing what is being referred to as a double pandemic. And you, Dr. G, have shared some really excellent resources and articles on this on your social media pages and talked about it in your podcast. Can you just briefly explain how these racial disparities within COVID-19, coupled with the trauma and microaggressions of systemic racism, how they're resulting in this severe physical, and mental, the health impacts and the disproportionate deaths that we're seeing in Black and Brown people related to coronavirus?
Sure. Well, we now know because of schools of medicine and public policy that stress related to health, stress related to race connected or related pressures have become a social determinant of health. That if an individual is experiencing a certain level of racial tension and microaggression, we now have a sense of what that means in their life and life expectancy. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if I mentioned this. Did I talk on the first part one of this about being invited into a space where we're talking about the allocation of ventilators? Yep. So what happens is you have stress that's prevalent. The community is not trying to get rid of it because it's a figment of people's imaginations. Again, we don't see color, we don't see issues. That's not a problem, Alex. So people are developing this stress that's weakening their systems so that they're more susceptible to these degenerative diseases. And then that very illness that's related to stress disqualifies them from ventilators or certain care. We now know that stress-related illnesses like hypertension and diabetes are not only precursors or it causes one to be more vulnerable to COVID-19, it also makes you more vulnerable to dementia and Alzheimer's. That stress that's connected to race relations is now an indicator of how long people of color live. And for me, that's really scary because we've only talked about race relations and that related stress in terms of comfort. Do I want to live in this neighborhood? Do I want to go to this school? Do I want to send my kid to this school? Do I want to? It's now not a matter of comfort. We have enough information to understand it is an indicator of someone's life expectancy. And so this is where our non-Black allies and friends have got to understand the impact of actions or inactions. When something happens like the Zoom bomb and we think that it's just only 4 bad folks. But someone knows them. Someone has parented them. They're probably married. God forbid they're someone's parents. And what if they're school teachers? What if they're doctors? What if they're police officers? What if they're ministers? What if they're Cub Scout leaders? Like, racists don't just live in a racist bubble and that's all they do. They do other things. They work in retail, they run businesses. And so we don't realize how pervasive that is. And it traumatized people for 2.5 minutes. Some of those folks won't forget that experience. But what I said to them in the room is, okay, so this happened. But what if now I have to go take my MCAT, the medical school? What if that happens? And I have to go take my LSAT right now. I've got to go take my entrance exam for pharmacy. This is what Black people have to deal with all the time. What if I have to now go to my doctor to get my blood pressure? What if I have to go and prepare a lecture right now? What if I have to go and operate because I'm a doctor? And so we don't just think about just that moment. Like for a lot of people who got that call, it was over. But then there's all this residual effect. And so it's that stuff that you got to do, that you got to figure out. Well, maybe I won't move into this new neighborhood. Maybe I won't take that job. Maybe I won't work in this office. And it just puts so much tentativeness in it that it's hard to ever feel settled. And it's that piece, that invisible hell that many of our non-Black colleagues don't see because it's so invisible, it's so intangible. And so many people were shocked that that attitude existed that would allow people to say those kinds of words. I was shocked that they were shocked because I'm trying to think, when did we hit the reset button to go back in time and not do that anymore? Just because you don't hear it doesn't mean it's not said. And when Black people say, something don't feel right in here, they look at me funny. I went to speak at a school in Seattle, and my apartment was in a security building. And when a person met me, he was physically grunting. Like he was like, what are you doing here? I said, I'm the invited speaker. I'm the guest lecturer this week. We did all this stuff. So the next day I just kind of said to the provost, what happened? He said, oh yeah, that guy. We found some white supremacy sites on his computer. Yeah, they're going to be investigating him. So I'm thinking, you know this? So you're cool because he's just looking at websites. He's not going to do anything. That man was like grunting, like he thought he needed to protect the university from me. And one crazy move could have meant something really, and this was like 10 years ago. This is before we had all the cameras and the social media and the big buzz. I look back on that event and I said, they knew, and let him still come to work because he's just searching stuff. He's looking at the sites. He's just curious, just because someone goes to a porn site doesn't mean they're a rapist. And just because someone goes to a white supremacist site doesn't mean that they're a racist. I'm through with that campus. And so I just think this is how nice people let evil people exist, because they don't believe that this evil is really inside people.
And to start, when you started to talk in that answer, Dr. G, you mentioned action or inaction. And this is the question that I'm sure is on the minds and hearts of the audience. And I have a couple questions that are going to build on each other. I'm kind of known for that. So just bear with me. But what do you want allies to do after seeing and internalizing the documentary of your family? And what would be your advice for allies when it comes to dismantling this system, knowing that can be overwhelming? And maybe potentially talk about your experience with the Fitchburg police officer and the woman who stopped, just to give the spectrum of actions that we can take.
Sure. I think, Dan, we have to fight the urge to want to take this on single-handedly and fix it because it makes us uncomfortable. If the desire is not to make society better for everyone, then people's motives are not necessarily that helpful. So by that, I mean, the commitment has really got to be, sorry, I'm just trying to save my battery here. And so what I want people to do is just take a period of time just to commit to understanding the history. Because you're not going to change the world after watching this. The whole world watched Roots in 1977 and it didn't change the world, because people are like, okay, no, that can't be true. He made it up. That's just one family. That's the Haley family. That's not everybody. And it didn't really lay out the economic benefit to America. I think it was so busy. Haley wanted to show the strength of his family, that the role of that was not to help to understand how America had become a superpower. So I think what people need to do is watch it again and again and watch it with your partner, watch it with your spouse, watch it with children who are old enough, watch it with your parents, and then ask, where does this touch my life? Because to watch it and to say, those white G's need to give him some land. Those white G's need to hook him up. Those white G's need to believe in reparations, and not think about, are you the most qualified in your job? Were you the most qualified to get into your college? Begin to think about what has been the impact and what's the advantage to not have to worry about certain things. My mom's having trouble in her nursing home, in her memory care facility. They're recommending another place, but it's outside Madison. It's Cambridge. Now, I've been to Cambridge. It's nice. It's a nice community. I have nothing against Cambridge. I don't know Cambridge. But they've never had a Black client. They've never had a Black resident. They've never had a Black cook. They've never had a Black nurse, CNA. They've never had a Black worker. There are no Black people living around it. So not only is it further from our home than what's going on right now, I have to wonder about what's the impact on that psychologically on my mom, that no artwork is familiar, no food is familiar, no culture is familiar, nothing is familiar. And even though she's demented, I cannot subject my mother to that. My white friends don't have to think about that stress. So I have to leave my mother in a place where I can monitor the danger. I can eye some of the physical danger, but her being further away and not seeing anything that's reinforcing who she is might make her slip away from me faster. I can't fathom that. I can't take that chance. And so I leave her in a place that's not quite as safe, but I've got folks that will tell me this is going on, that's going on. There's some folks that look like her, and they're keeping me posted. I can't begin to tell you the horror that is for this 56-year-old mama's boy. I can't tell you what it means to choose the lesser of two evils. And so that's just a reality. So you're not going to fix all of that, but understand it. Really commit to understanding it. And I think during the journey, Dan, of understanding it, there are opportunities to do something to be helpful. So last week I went for a walk early morning to let off some stress from that Zoom bombing. Because I didn't think it was really affecting me. I just woke up the next day just feeling mad. I woke up just, friends are just like, what's wrong with you? You seem different. And I just need to say I'm 56 and I haven't been called that name in like 50 years. So I didn't think it was going to have the impact. Like I wasn't going to run and shrivel up and die, but just the anger, for you to think you're better to be able to say that to me, to try to think you could push that on me. Anyway, so I was walking and I saw a Fitchburg police officer and I said, you know what? I'm tired of feeling this stress. I introduced myself, just walked up to the car, stood far away, kind of waved, got his attention. He got out, he shook my hand, and we talked. I explained who I am, what's going on. The photo bombing had been reported to Fitchburg police because it's where it happened. I mean, it's a Zoom bombing. And then I walked away. We had a good talk and walked away. An older white woman driving a company truck. I walked in front of her car and her truck. She rolled down her window. She said, "Hey, are you okay?" When she said, "Hey," I just thought, okay, what's about to happen now? And she said, "Are you okay?" And I turned around and I said, trying to think, why she asked me, am I okay? Like, does she think I'm lost? Like, what's going on? I saw you talking to the police. And I said, oh, I introduced myself because I'm tired of the angst and I want police in my community to know me. And she said, okay, I just wanted to make sure you're okay, that nothing bad was going on. She said, but it's wrong that you even have to do that you even have to introduce the police to feel safe. And she said, I love you. I said, I teared up a little. I said, I love you too. You just made my day. And then she drove off and I realized we make allyship more difficult than it needs to be. She saw a moment of what she thought was injustice. And I believe that if I turned around and said, no, I'm not well, he just stopped me in broad daylight and asked me for identification, blah, blah, blah. I think she would have turned her car around and would have went over there and said, what the hell? Give me your badge number. I believe that that's what would have happened. And there was a car behind it. It's one of those busy intersections on Fish Hatchery where people want you to go so they can get across it. She took her time. She said, are you okay? Not what did they say to you? Did they stop you? Was, are you okay? There was something compassionate in it. She didn't know me. She didn't know my name. She could have thought or overthought, well, do I want to make it seem like as a Black person, he can't handle his own business? Will I sound like a paternalistic? Will I sound, like I'm fighting your battles? I felt like she just said, screw it. I'm going to talk human being to human being. Are you okay? And I'm going to tell you, part of that stress that I've been carrying from that Zoom bombing just dissipated right then. Because I need to believe that in a world, there was somebody for whom that wouldn't be okay. Because what happens is it gets in your head, and when you do this work and you're reading this stuff, and then you believe in unity and that there will be a day to sing Kumbaya, when you believe it and then you get called an N-word on your own platform, it's a sucker punch. And this is what I said to the white allies in the room. This is why I need you all to get upset. Not just that the N-word was being used. This is what I want you to get upset about. It makes me as a Black man think, well, how many of y'all think this too? How many, and if this was on the street, would you just cross it? 20 people bolted. So if someone's berating me and calling me this on State Street, do you cross the street and say, well, what did he do to get called it? Like it makes me begin to question who's got my back on this. And I feel like when people do that, it has the potential. It doesn't do it, but it has the potential of setting race relations back, because you don't know. Because I start thinking, who let them in this room? Who knew that they were here? You know, your brain goes all over the place. And just having that one person say, are you good? Are you good? Because that's what Black people do to each other a lot of time. We'll see somebody, they might be talking to a security guard in the mall or doing something, and we'll be like, hey, excuse me, young man, you good? You okay? You need me to call somebody? You all right? Somebody stopped on the side of the road. You good? You need some help? So when she stopped and said, are you good? That was like medicine to my soul. And so we become inclined enough, and we become aware enough of the issues, so that when we do see injustice, we know how to insert ourselves to at least say, I'm here. And that made a huge difference. And I'm glad you brought that question up, because I want people to understand that being an ally is not just the one thing you do, it's the way you think, it's the way you navigate the world. You look at things differently, so you can begin to say, even when it's not a Black person there, excuse me, I noticed that you asked them for ID, but you didn't ask the person before them for ID. Or you didn't ask me for ID and my purchase was smaller than theirs. Can I ask you why? It's stuff like that. I can have the NAACP and Urban League call political officials, but when white people call and say, have you reached out to this ally? That's something completely different. Because when Martin Luther King Jr. started mobilizing non-Blacks, that's when he became a threat. As long as he was marching Negroes cross bridges, they're like, okay, that's what they do. But then when he started talking about poverty and the Vietnam War and economic empowerment, they're like, wait, hold it. He's talking to us about us. And that was a whole different level. And so if we want to make really big change, we need our non-Black allies to know your voice, your vote, your email, your text, your dollar, your download, all of that stuff matters. Why don't we fund this? Like, okay, so she asked that one question, but folks who are part of boards, hey, I noticed I give to this fund and there's like 20 people and one Black person. I know that there are more Black people in Madison than ever before. What's up with this? I noticed that this is a diversity panel and no one on is a person of color. There are questions. You don't even have to have all the answers. Just the questions that will help people to think about what's happening. I think the voice of allies is really important, but don't think that we're expecting you to fix it. Become so aware of the issues that in the moment you realize this is a chance to ask something, to say something, to push something that can really bring about a change. And can I just say, you all, we don't ever, here's the stressful thing about race relations. This is the stuff that can really make you lose it. I was in first class one time. I got bumped up on a flight, and I went to the bathroom, and there's only like 5 rows in first class, and only 2 seats each. So there's only like 10 people, and the flight attendant looked at me and said, "Should you really be up here?" And I must have had this incredulous look. I really had to go then, and so I must have had this really incredulous look on my face. And she just kind of went like this. And she stepped out of the way so that I could go to the bathroom. Now, for the rest of my life, I will never know if that's race related. Now, we do know this. She rarely sees Black people in first class. So the assumption was I had a pressing need to pee in first class, that I didn't want to walk back to coach like I do on 95% of all my other flights. But here's what catches a brother up. In my mind, I will never think about that again until something else happens. Like, I won't think about that again until I remember that I was walking into an event. I'm a guest of one of my friends who's a president of a prestigious university, and I'm walking in, and he has my ticket, and he and his wife are walking in front of me. They're white, I'm right behind them. They just walk right in. They don't have their tickets. They're not out. They have my ticket. They don't ask them anything. But then someone stops me and says, "Excuse me, may I get your ticket?" Out of embarrassment for me, my white friends want to laugh to kind of just say, "Oh, but at that moment, I remember the flight attendant. I remember the police officers in my church parking lot. I remember my homeroom teacher at West High School telling me, "You're a good-looking Black kid," because if I were white, I guess I'd be ugly. Or my counselor telling me that I'm not university material, and now he's got to call me Dr. G when he sees me. I remember all of them like a movie. Like I don't walk around thinking about it. The horror and the weightiness of the invisible fruit of systemic racism is that when it happens, you remember everything. But when you're not, you're just enjoying life. And then in a moment's time, somebody can call you a word on a Zoom call and all of it comes back. It starts coming back like, oh, have we changed? Does my work matter? Do I need to just move south like everybody else? And I just think people need to understand that's why when folks are seeing injustice or systems that aren't right or actions that are inconsistent with the stated goals of an organization, someone's got to say something.
And we have a couple questions that have come in the chat.
Sure.
One specifically around what you were just talking about safety is, when do you ever feel safe?
I feel safe when I'm in Black space and I can celebrate my successes, but also talk about stresses and feel like I don't have to code switch. I can just sort of relax and be. I've worked really hard in my faith community and inside my organization to build strong cross-cultural relationships where we can talk about some of these things, but not very often, which is why sometimes Black people talk about if they're going to live in Madison, they need a Black tax, which means if everybody else is making X, I need to make X plus 25 just because of the extra pressure, because I've got to think differently about hair and childcare and schooling and stuff, because you hold it together. And it's not until you're not in that space, Dan. I have a restaurant spot I love to hang out in Harlem. I got a buddy who's Korean American, and we've been talking a lot about Black Asian American connections because my Asian American brothers and sisters are experiencing an onslaught of racial violence that they've not experienced in this country in decades, not on the same level. And as I sat there, and we're eating off paper plates, the table's kind of rickety. I'm not saying the Black restaurants have got to be this, but it kind of reminds you like an aunt or uncle's house. And I looked around, you can get great pop. And I looked around and I said, Peter, do you know why I always asked you to bring me here? Do you know why I love this space? And he said, why? I said, because I don't have to explain or justify a damn thing. I know why whatever it is, I know what the food is, and I don't have to explain what is that. Oh my, what, I feel like people get me, and I don't have to explain. So it's not until I'm in that space, because I've lived in Madison my whole life. It's not until I'm in that space. When I went to West Africa, it was hard to come back home. I could not believe how healing and therapeutic it was to see Black posters and on the airlines, it was Black flight attendants and Black pilots, and the banks were led by, because it's Africa, Black CEOs. The plethora of Blackness blew my mind. And I felt so deprived that after only a week coming back and landing at Reagan Airport, whatever the airport was in DC, just seeing diverse folks and more white folks was like a snapback to reality. And so we rarely do it. That's why I'm going to be announcing a project that we're working on in the next several weeks that's going to help to create that space where people can feel safe, because the lack of not feeling that is killing us. It's killing. And in places where we think we are relaxing, that is sometimes where our non-Black allies may see us and they want to talk about race. Like, it's so surprising when sometimes I am in that mood, I feel really relaxed, and someone will walk up in a relaxed setting. You know, I might just be chilling and having wine someplace with some friends. It could be a cross-cultural group of friends. And they, you know, I read this article by, Coates, and he said, I'm like, do you not see this apple martini in my hand? Do I look like I want to talk about Black history right now? And so even when you're not ready to, sometimes people will assume it's this moment. Let's talk about race. Let's talk about difference. Let's talk about defunding police. And so it's hard to find it in places like Madison. Unless we find places where people can have that, we're not going to maintain and retain diversity.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dr. Chi. Looking back through the chat and a couple of our overflow questions from our last session. Okay. One of the ones that sticks out is, going back and tying into what you've said about not understanding the problem, how not understanding the problem is the problem. I would love to just take some time, even if you can briefly explain the concept of reparations and the importance of investing in the Black dollar today. We've got a couple questions around reparations, and I know that just the theme of investing in the Black dollar has been almost a little bit of like a buzz term, and what, like the what allies should do sort of list. And I want to make sure that people really understand what that means, and just the true, the true impact behind it.
Sure. I would say, well, that's a big question. I mean, that could actually be a course, Samantha. So what I would say is, I would encourage people to not get stuck on the topic of reparations. Not that it isn't important, but to the extent to which it really needs to happen, it can take up so much energy that we miss the opportunity to do things like invest in Black business and opportunity. In Madison, if I were strictly working in business, Samantha, we could talk about the role of white men in banking and other real estate and other industries that are really holding and keeping Black people at bay. In social services, it's white women. In education and social services and nonprofit leadership, it's women. And the battle is just as fierce, because until Black people started entering that space, white women could say to funders, well, by being white and female, I understand disenfranchisement. I understand the pressure of white men and the dominance. And so white women could speak with the authority of whiteness, but with sort of the protection of Blackness and brownness. We get it. We understand. There's a huge struggle in that area in Madison. And in the industry, and that's something we got to really, really wrestle with. We don't have enough time. I hope we can talk about that when we get together again. And so, but what I think folks have got to understand is slavery meant the devaluing of Black individuals, but valuing what they produce. And so it's created this economic disparity. And so if we don't begin to think of ways to invest in Black communities and invest in Black community builders, we're never going to be full players at the table who can take care of ourselves. Right now, through social services, basically people are saying it, people watching this, they might get mad that I'm saying it, but it's sort of like you dangle something in front of them. Here's my M&M. You're dangling something. Okay, here's some money. We want to fund rooftop gardening. We will get creative and figure out, now this is a nonprofit thing too, how to get the money to do that, because that might help our organization somehow. But in the midst of everything that's happened, we have cried, we have bled. People have talked about George Floyd in Syria, in Germany, around the world. But yet there's been no large gathering of folks who are influencers who are Black saying, what do your organizations and your community need in terms of infrastructure to deal with all that you have endured? And now it's come to a head, and we understand that systemic racism is at the root of this. And then we're going to still talk about regular RFPs and how we create programs and after school programming, and not look at how do we fix the issue. So what we've got to really do in order to create an even playing field is we've got to invest in Black businesses. We've got to invest in Black organizations, and not just invest by giving them programs that's going to stretch their infrastructure. What do they need to build their infrastructure in order to grow in a way that's commensurate with the need of our community? Everyone went berserk over COVID-19. Oh my God, it's hitting the Black community faster. But we were saying there are pre-existing conditions medically and in society. And so like our organization's got to deal with the pre-COVID reality, COVID, and then the post-COVID cleanup. You can't just fix that with program dollars. At some point, the organizations have got to grow. And so what we've got to do is have people ask, well, where are the Black businesses and how do we invest in them? Because we're investing in people doing business with folks. They can begin to help to strengthen their communities, hire, make a change, have a voice, and not be afraid of the repercussions of being honest, because the funding base is diverse and you don't have the fear of being cut off because you challenge systemic money. And so I think the real discussion has got to be, what do we do? What do individuals do to help even the playing field? And a big part of that is that we've got to find out how to invest in Black-led entities. I'm just surprised that's not the big discussion. I'm so afraid that we're going to go right back to where we had been and just sort of be quiet and hold our breath until we forget about George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, which is what we do. We're at this juncture where we got to be able to find out, okay, where are the Black-owned businesses? How do we support them? Because that is the American way. Grow your enterprise, hire people, make a difference, put money back into the community. But you can't do that through program dollars. You've got to really strengthen these organizations and support Black businesses.
So thank you for that, Dr. Gene. I think that's a perfect segue. We have a couple questions still. We will be talking about a future event, so we're going to record all of those questions and find a way to bring those back. But I think this is a perfect segue. So we've received some questions about what is justified anger? What is Nehemiah? How does this relate? And then you had sent an email out about the sustained solidarity team.
Sure.
I think this is a perfect opportunity. Could you explain the two organizations or initiative and then how it relates to this team?
Definitely. I will say this. I created Nehemiah almost 30 years ago because I noticed that the Black community had doubled in Madison, but judges, social workers, teachers, administrators had not doubled. So I saw the issue that Madison was growing, and if they didn't see more role models, we would experience a lot of the disparities we're seeing now. It wasn't just me. Folks were saying this in the 80s. Madison said to us as Black influencers, no, we don't see color. Please just come on, Alex. You guys just do your thing. Color will never hinder how people see your work. So because I didn't believe that, I created Nehemiah, which basically was a Black social service organization. We were contracted by the county, and we work with children with severe emotional disturbances. So I'm sorry, let me just get to the point. We were created to provide support services, counseling, therapeutic mentoring, family support, case management for African Americans who are having trouble navigating Madison. After doing that for a number of years, we realized that people coming out of prison, others wanted to get their lives together. So Nehemiah really served as a leadership foundation where we gave people the capacity to really succeed. But what I realized is that we're only working on half of the equation. I was telling Black folks, you can be anything you want to be. You can do whatever you want to do. You're the best. You're the brightest. You descend from kings and queens. But their white teachers, social workers, judges weren't getting that same memo. And so Nehemiah's work has been about how do you build capacity in the Black community, the way the Black community built capacity in me and my mom, who's a high school dropout, and now with her children and children's children having almost 12 degrees from Wisconsin, it was because the community rallied around her. So Nehemiah designed itself to build capacity and surround African-American influencers in our community who didn't have their own cheering section to give them culturally competent, culturally relevant services that they asked for. We need mentoring. We need family therapy from somebody who was a single mom who can explain Madison to people from Chicago. Well, somebody explained it to my mom. So as a therapist, she did it as a part of Nehemiah's staff. But as I wrote the Justified Anger op-ed piece in 2013, what I was really saying was, we've been training Black people and say a day is going to come, a day is going to come, a day is going to come, but none of the systems were changing. And so we realized to bring about true change, we needed an initiative of Nehemiah called Justified Anger that would focus on how do you change systems through relationship building, using U.S. Black history to bring people into a new awareness of how we became a great country, and to bring to bear the systemic realities, the historic realities that have kept certain groups subservient and have other groups to thrive. Because if we didn't unveil that, well-intentioned white people would just say, if they just raised their children and went to school and just raised their hands and did what they were told, this wouldn't happen. So Nehemiah has created this initiative called Justified Anger that's allowing our non-Black allies to be a part of the solution, because there are not enough Black people in Madison to change white people's perception. And while we are building capacity in people coming out of prison, children raised without their fathers, strengthening single moms, helping people with address their mental health issues, if we didn't find well-intentioned, predominantly white but non-Black folks to understand the role they could play in dismantling this within their own spheres of influence, unless we did that, we would only be building better programs, but no one would be opening doors because they didn't know they were supposed to, that they could, or that this was problematic. And so we build capacity in general in our African-American folks through culturally relevant programming that helps them to be strong to let their weaknesses become their strengths, and to give back to their community. With our non-Black allies, through education, through mentoring, through coaching, through cross-cultural leadership training, we want to bring people to the light to understand that it is not only within their power, but it is their responsibility, if they're going to build a stronger Madison for all, to use their power, their voice, their office, their talents to be anti-racist. Because it's not just enough just to say, oh, that breaks my heart. They've got to speak out against these systems and find out how they find their own personal role to begin to dismantle or to stand in solidarity with folks who are experiencing this. And so that's the initiative. And it's very unique, Dan and Samantha, that a Black-led entity with a Black leader would create an element of their work that's helping non-Black people, predominantly white people, become a part of the solution. Because the thought by funders and others is that you're Black, you do Black stuff, you work with Black people want to hear from Black people. But our role is to help white people do the work that they need to do and motivate them and coach them through it. Certainly let them do their own work, but helping them to understand without your partnership, not only do you inhibit our growth, but you then inadvertently pass this ugliness onto your children and your grandchildren. And you ought to be invested in this because of what it's going to cost your family. And I feel like that work on both sides of the equation has allowed this movement to be very powerful and to have had 1,000 non-Black allies move through the history class while we're still building capacity in emerging Black leaders and strengthening Black families. And so that's why we say, as our tagline for Nehemiah, is that we're strengthening Madison for all. The assumption is because I'm Black, I'm only strengthening it for Black people. But I understand that if Black people and brown people and disadvantaged people thrive in Madison, then the quality of life is enhanced for everyone. I'm trying to make all of Madison stronger. And if our non-Black people don't help us, we will never get there.
So thank you for sharing all of that detail. And for those in the audience or listening, we'll be sending this presentation out. So there'll actually be a link to donate as well. And I want to clarify that Dr. G has not asked us to talk about donation so much as what Samantha and I have tonight. In fact, we were saying, please let us talk about it, because this is where the critical piece comes in. And so I wanted to clarify that with us being up against time right now, wanted to just highlight one more next step coming up. So in 2 weeks on Monday, there's going to be an incredible discussion with Dr. Clark Pujara. She was one of the panelists on the documentary premiere. I got the chance to listen to her in the Black History course. I would strongly encourage you to attend, and it's really going to be about patriotism and the cost of apathy.
Yes.
So when we talk about inaction and the cost of not caring and turning an eye the other way, she's going to really take it home here about what that cost is and provide a different definition of patriotism than maybe than what comes to mind right away. That said, I also want to really quick give Maggie Brickerman, who is a partner with The Generator, the chance to just quickly talk about a racial justice issue that's here in Dane County before we wrap things up.
Sure.
So Maggie?
Dr. G, did you want to say anything else?
No, I just will say, even for those who have attended the Black History course, this is a different lecture, and there are other components of it that really makes it an experience. And the donation or the cost helps to underwrite our expenses of moving the class online. So people will be educated. It's a taste of what's to come, but it also is our way of raising dollars to expedite digitizing all of this so that we're no longer limited by physical space for the class, but it helps us to open it to a broader group of people. So please sign up.
I was just going to say, with how much Dr. Clark Pujara packed into like 4 minutes, I think is how much she was given. I'm like, how much can I possibly learn? Anyway, well, thanks for giving me just a quick chance to share just a little bit about a current issue that is coming before the Dane County Board. So it's going to get real. I'm just going to say it's sexy, local government. Here we go. But as we know, local government is actually quite powerful. So one thing I want to mention is we were talking on the call before this resolution that's before the county board. I want to share some information on. We're kind of waiting to hear from Dr. G just to make sure, I think we'll be aligned on it. But if it turns out that we're not, I will be the first person to say, whoops, I picked the wrong thing. and we'll send out more information. But let me just give you the background quickly, and then I'll tell you, also with the caveat that I am not an expert, and so I've pulled together some information, but feel free to put anything in the chat if you have different information. So about a year ago, so just so everyone knows, in Dane County, it is the county that runs the jail. There was quite a contentious process about a year ago to secure funding for a new jail in Dane County. The current jail that we have is extremely outdated. It's dangerous. It's inhumane. There is no question that that is true. And what was approved about a year ago is $148 million to build a new jail downtown. The jail that was approved has 922 beds in it. So what has happened since then is, and you know, I think at the time there was a bit of sort of discussion around reform, but really nothing tied to this jail passing to, you know, really have the county as a whole pass any reforms that might reduce the need for the jail in the first place. So fast forward to today, due to COVID, the population of the jail has gone from 746 people on March 10th to 441 people on April 19th. So, you know, I think that has proved what advocates have been saying for a long time, which is that there are a lot of people in our county jail who don't need to be there. There are people who are held on bail, who are, you know, perfectly have the legal right to walk out of the jail if they only had the money to pay for that bail. So there are many instances, again, that advocates have been arguing for, that we have a lot of folks in the jail who don't need to be there, and COVID really proved that. So again, 922 beds have been approved in this plan, and there are now only 400 or so people in the county jail. So what has been introduced, and I should mention, you know, I think everyone kind of knows this, but this really is a racial justice issue. Now I know that there are people in the county jail who don't necessarily reside in the county just because of the way the legal system works, but the population of Dane County in 2019 was about 5.5% Black citizens, and the jail is 45% Black citizens who are held there. So this is very much, I don't think we need to belabor that point, but just to hit that home that this is a racial justice issue. So there's a resolution that's been introduced last week in light of everything that's going on to hit pause on the plans for the new jail. The second part, I think, is the most important piece, and it speaks to what Dr. G was saying. The second part calls to add more voices of people of color to the Criminal Justice Council. So this is sort of a roundtable on the county, and it has people like the sheriff, the district attorney, representatives from the county board, who get together to really figure out what does criminal justice look like in the county. They're currently on the full sort of board is only one African American, and that's our district attorney. There are some subcommittees that have a bit more representation, but I think that, you know, the point is, we need just more people around the table who can really figure out what the future of this needs to look like. And then the third component of the resolution is to consider, you know, basically hit pause on the jail and think about what are more meaningful reforms that we could implement as a county that would actually influence the plans for what that jail might end up looking like. So the resolution's been introduced, and it's pretty straightforward. I think the county board needs to hear from us because there was a lot of work, obviously, that went into the jail plan a year ago, and it's really hard. Like, we should acknowledge that what we're asking them to do is very hard, to stop something that's in motion and do this really hard work to figure out what are meaningful reforms that can be implemented for the future of this county. And so I think making your voice heard and letting your county supervisor know that you support this and we realize what we're asking them to do and that it's hard work, but it's worth it. I think that's, the ask is just that simple. So Dan's got the background that I just went through. We have sort of like some stock language if you don't feel comfortable drafting something yourself. And again, I'm not an expert, but I'm more than happy to tell you what I know. And with the final caveat that if Dr. G says you're barking up the wrong tree, I'll let you know.
And I don't think I'll be saying that.
Awesome. Thank you, Maggie.
Yes.
Maggie, that was very good. Dan, can I just say something for just a quick second?
Yep.
The reason these initiatives don't get stopped, and I think Maggie did an excellent job of picking it up, is that no politician comes on television and says, lock the Black people up. They'll say things like, we need to be hard on crime. Do you want your child to be safe? Do you want your child to worry about crime? But we've already put in people's minds because of media that this means dangerous, this means threatening, this means all of these kinds of things. And so without even saying Black, the code is safe, hard on crime, tough on drugs, all those things to say, well, of course, we want the streets to be safer. But just think about this. If we're down to 441 people in the jail now, and we're building 92, what business would not want to fill that up? Even if it were, a Holiday Inn Express, like restaurant, like who would not want to fill it up? And so I want people to understand that you don't necessarily see this as a racial issue because it's just a public safety issue, but the fear that's been put in white people's mind to vote a particular way has been that people like me are menacing and threatening. And if we weren't doing criminal things, there'd be no need for us to be away anyhow. Have we heard about crime going up in Madison by releasing hundreds of people into the community? And so this is a time for real discussion, and many of us don't see this as a racial discussion. That's the power of systemic racism. We can say things like crime, and you don't have to say color, but it's what happens in people. It's what you respond to.
Thank you for that background as well, because I think those are the key words that as we're like starting our journey, we may not have been aware of, and so we potentially make the wrong decision. So
sure.
With that, we do want to close it up. So thank you, Dr. G, again for giving so much of your time. And we love the candid storytelling. We love just the absolute honesty that comes in these discussions, and we can't thank you enough.
Thank
and
you.
We also want to thank the generator. So they, again, continue to supply the technology. And we're actually excited to partner yet again. We have already talked about the next event. So we've been talking with Dr. G about if we can continue getting enough people, we're going to keep holding these sessions. And we've received some questions about how do we have a book club, or how do we have a movie watch party? What we're going to be doing is watching, or asking you to watch 13th. It's a documentary, and it's really going to dive into the criminal justice system, exactly what we were just talking about, systems of oppression, systemic realities that are here today. And so we're going to be actually asking you to watch the film, and then we're going to be having Dr. G unpack the content that's shared in that documentary, similar to tonight. And that's going to be on August 4th at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we're going to continue these, like I said, as potentially a monthly series, and changing the topic, changing the questions, just to keep everybody informed and to keep this front of mind for everyone. And so lastly, before we leave, I will send out this presentation to everyone. So you'll have the links, everything is live. And then before we leave though, my ask is going to be one thing, and that is, as Samantha kicked off the event, she talked about this being a lifelong journey. Dr. G has talked about, we're not going to solve this tomorrow, and we're not going to solve it by ourselves, right? But what we want to really hone in on is that this is about being better tomorrow, not being perfect, willing to make mistakes, but not letting the fear of making the mistakes lead to inaction. And so my ask of you is to take the next step. We heard from Dr. G, vote, use your voice, educate. There are so many different things that you can be doing that you heard from him tonight. Just take the next step. And so we'll be coming back on August 4th. Don't forget the event on July 27th. And with that, we're going to end it. So have a great night, everyone.
Thanks everyone so much.
Thank you for attending.